I'm from the United States. I live in Michigan, and this is the picture of the local athletic field just the other day from my house. So I'm melting here, so if you try and find me later and you can't, I'm like in a pool, you know, I've melted like the Wicked Witch of the West. So I'm happy to be in Singapore. This is my first time, very beautiful, so I'm glad to be here. So like it was mentioned, I'm talking about Spring Cloud Gateway. I am the lead of the Spring Cloud core projects, co-creator of Spring Cloud. I've been at Pivotal for 5.5 years. So before we start, a little bit of history, right? It used to be that we created monoliths, but we're moving to microservices. And there were problems in trying to move to this architecture. Problems with the network, right? New instances go up, they disappear, how do I find them? The network might be slow, it might be non-functional, right? There's all sorts of problems that we have in this architecture that we need to deal with. And just this mapping was not a great, it couldn't be handled by the client, so we had to put something in between, and that's an API gateway. And this is a great place to handle all sorts of things in your architectures. Things like resiliency, things like circuit breaking, so we can protect users from downstream failures, security. There's a lot of things that we can do in this space in our architectures. So Spring Cloud Gateway is cloud native, but what on earth does that even mean? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about this. So it's independently deployable. It's just a Spring Boot application, right? There's no tickets, you don't need to, you just deploy your Spring Boot application. So there's all sorts of tutorials out there on deploying to your favorite platform. You know, you can find tutorials for Cloud Foundry, obviously, for Kubernetes, for all sorts of different things. And knowing Spring Boot now is actually a marketable skill, right? Because it's so commonly used. So there's integration with Spring Cloud service registries. So we have an abstraction over service registration. So things like Netflix Eureka, HashiCorp Console, or Apache Zookeeper, you can connect Gateway to these services, and it will automatically create routes for registered services. You can put in some bits of metadata into your services when they register that say, hey, I need a route to be created on the gateway, and we'll do it automatically. So with very little configuration, you could have a gateway that automatically routes to all your services. Gateway also integrates with the Spring Cloud distributed configuration patterns. So we can load configuration remotely from sources like Spring Cloud Config Server, Console from HashiCorp, Zookeeper, Vault, which holds secure information. And it can be refreshed. So if you update the configuration, you add new routes, you could just refresh Gateway, and new routes can be updated or added, and old routes can be updated. So this is a sample of what route configuration might look like in YAML. Okay, so we'll get to talk about what some of these things mean, but are there any YAML programmers out there today? No? Okay. Especially when we get into Kubernetes, right? There's YAML everywhere. YAML seems to be the thing to do. Not everyone likes YAML, but it can be, we can configure Gateway remotely. So Gateway also promotes fault tolerance. So things like circuit breakers that are used to protect downstream services, and also request rate limiting can happen at the gateway. So we can protect our users from seeing failures that might otherwise affect their experience. So teams love Spring Cloud Gateway. It's built on the foundation of Reactor, Spring Framework, and Spring Boot. So Project Reactor is the reactive streams implementation from the Spring team, from Pivotal. And it provides a foundation for non-blocking workloads, okay? So this is effectively an event loop architecture, okay? So any Node.js fans out there, okay, a number of you, you've been doing this for a long time, right? So this brings this style of application to Spring applications. So requests come in, they get placed on a queue, and the event loop eventually will pick them up. Then requests are made downstream, and the responses get sent back. But none of this blocks threads, right? So by default, Reactor Netty is a single thread per core on your machines. So it's very efficient use of the hardware that you have and the resources that your machines have. So besides YAML configuration, there's also DSL that's available. And so your developers in your enterprise can use this DSL in whatever language they're comfortable with. We have a Java DSL, we also have a Kotlin DSL. So you get integration with your IDE. So, I thought there was a slide there with a sample. And code completion, all of that. For Kotlin, you get idiomatic DSLs, things like that. So when, oh, see, I had the wrong order. So this is what a Java DSL looks like. And I'll show a little bit of demo of that, but I'll have to readjust the slide for my next presentation. So it should have been first. So when you configure the gateway, you create predicates that match a route, and then you can apply filters to those routes. So let me back up a little now. Now I can show you what that looks like. So we take advantage of Spring Framework, the WebFlux programming model in Spring Framework. And it has this notion of handler mappings, which allow me to plug in your custom predicates to say, I want to match whatever in the request and then route it to this location. And then you can write filters, and we have a bunch of filters that are built in, and I'll talk about those in a second. But they can either be pre- or post-style filters. Then there are some global filters that come with the gateway, and these kinds of things apply to all routes kind of regardless. So then the request is made to the downstream service, and eventually the request will get back to the client. So the kinds of things that we can match in the gateway is basically anything in the request. So it could be the path, could be the host name, could be a date or time, which might be useful in putting up an outage notice or something like that. It could be HTTP method, any of the headers, anything that you can match on, including the body. We had requests for it. People always wanted to be able to match on the request body, but it comes with a warning, right? Once you read the body into memory, you've now become memory constrained, right? So you're less efficient with your resources because now memory is now the limiting resource, okay? So it can happen, but should only be used for special cases. So then you can start filtering the requests. You can add, remove, or modify headers. You can change the path. You can do complex things like rate limiting and circuit breaking. And again, you can modify the body. But you don't have to do anything. It's fairly simple, actually, to modify the body as a developer because we reuse the codecs that Spring provides in WebFlux. So basically, all you have to do is tell it the input type and what the output type is, and it will do it for you almost automatically. Again, you become memory constrained. So the things that are global filters, these are things like the Netty routing filter. This actually makes the downstream requests. We have a WebSocket filter, so you can do long-running web requests. We have a load balancer filter, so most of the time you don't want to just connect to one single instance downstream, right? You want to be able to have some set of instances that you're load balancing against and make a decision here. And it could be Ribbon, it could be our new Spring Cloud Load Balancer, it really doesn't matter. And then we do some custom metrics filters so that you can see what is traveling through your gateway. So on the way back out, you can then change the response, right? You can change the HTTP status if you want. You can add and remove headers again and things like cookies. So that was out of order. So one of the things, so Gateway was designed with a user experience in mind. So how many of you have heard of Zuul? Few of you, right? You may be wondering, why didn't we do Zuul 2 instead of Gateway? Well, when they announced Zuul 2 a number of years ago, they published a snapshot of the source code, and I looked at it, and Zuul 1 has some really weird contracts in its API. If you've ever written a Zuul filter, you're required to return something, but you can just return null because nothing ever reads the return value, right? So there's odd things like that. Lots of static methods and values and things. So as I looked at the source code for Zuul 2, I decided that I was going to have to reinvent a lot of wheels, things that Spring already provided me. And when I first talked about Gateway, when it first came out, I would tell people that, you should never write your own gateway. And then someone turned around and said, well, so how come you can write one? Well, so Zuul 1, if you go look at what the Zuul core provides, it's basically a servlet with a loop, and it provides some simple APIs. There's actually no filters provided, so we had to actually write one before. So we've really written one, and we're able to take our experience in writing that one and provide a better developer experience and a better overall experience for users with Gateway. And one of those is actually implementing a filter. So they're small, they're easily testable. You can write a unit test because Spring provides all sorts of WebFlux tools and classes that you can use, so you don't need to spin up a full server to unit test a filter, which is fantastic, which we could not do with Zuul because of its complexity. So in this sample, this is a shortened version of our set status filter. So this is the thing that would change the response status of a response. So we parse out the status that we want to change to, and then if you recall from Josh's talk today on Reactor, we start to see some Reactor in our APIs. So at the bottom here, we have chain.filter and then, right? So then is a Reactor function. And this means after the filter chain is executed, run this piece of code, which we set the response status. So this effectively, if we would have done it before the call to chain.filter, this would be a pre-filter, but set status, because you do .then, is effectively a post filter. So here we get a sample of the Kotlin. So one of the things that you'll notice in the YAML configuration is that there's no way to do ands or ors or nots or anything. If you list predicates in YAML, they're all anded together. I just didn't want to try and reproduce some programming language in YAML, right? So if you want to do that, you can drop into the Java or the boot. And it's nice in Kotlin because that and is actually a function in the DSL, right? So it's actually, but it's super nice to look at. Much nicer than the Java DSL to look at least. All right, demo time. So I didn't have to change Windows because I'm already here. So we've seen this today a number of times, right? Start.spring.io. Josh's second favorite place on production. What's the number favorite place? Production is the favorite place. This is the second favorite place. What's the heartburn? If your kids are, right? I have 4 kids, so I'm here a lot. No. Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna do our gateway. So we need the gateway starter. We're gonna do Hystrix. We're gonna do Redis. We're gonna do Actuator. Okay, that looks good. To our demo workspace here. I can't spell, sorry. We'll see how quickly the Wi-Fi resolves our dependencies. So while it's doing that, I'm using boot 2.1. Boot 2.2 came out, right? We just released yesterday, the day before, another release candidate for Hoxton. The final release will be in a week or two. So we're really close. But I will be demoing with our current Greenwich release. So we have our gateway, Hystrix there. So open our application. So I create a bean of type route locator, which is a simple API. And I need a special bean to come in that's called a route locator builder. And this is the DSL that I'll use. So return builder.routes.build. Okay, so this is a gateway that does nothing. Okay, so we haven't told it to do anything. So as I do my demos, you know, it's late in the day. We're getting kind of tired. It's a fire hose, isn't it? Like so much good information today that by the end of the day, you're like, oh my word, I can't learn another thing. But I want you to learn, if you learn nothing from me today, here's 2 tools that I want you to learn about, okay? That I'm gonna use during my demos so that you understand. So we have to route to somewhere. So the place I'm going to route to is a neat place on the internet called HTTP bin, okay? So this place, it's just a website. You send it requests, and it responds with information about the request you gave it. Very useful in designing and building a gateway and testing APIs, for example. So you can see it has methods like /delete, /get. So we'll use these methods as we go along, okay? So I'm going to create a route. We're going to call it path. So we're going to match by path, and I'm going to say /headers, which is one of the available paths in that I can use. So I'm going to apply a filter here. Josh actually was instrumental in helping me design this functional DSL. So we're going to add a request header. And my colleague, who is a technical writer, would berate me for using foo and bar in a demo, but I don't care. So I need somewhere to go to. Again, this is HTTP bin. Okay, the port is implied. If you don't put a port, it will be port 80 if it's HTTP, 443 if it's HTTPS. Otherwise, you need to put the port that you're going to. So let's start this. Is that text good enough? Is that a little better for you in the back? We good? I'm sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold. That's why I have to figure out why port 8080 isn't working on my machine. Something is using it. So I will port 80 live demos, right? Okay, so we can see a few things here. We use Netty by default. Right now, Gateway supports Netty as a runtime. It's my goal in the next service release to support Tomcat as well, at least, and likely Jetty as a runtime. Started fairly quickly, so now back to our terminal. Oh, so the other tool. Second thing that you should learn today, if nothing else. So who here is familiar with curl? Command, like, okay, almost everybody. So for those, like, I've been a developer for 20 plus years, and I still have to look up, how on earth do I send data? So I use a different tool called HTTPy, which it's a lovely tool. I call it curl for humans, since I'm not a machine. Curl is wonderful for machines, right? So back we go. The command is, conveniently enough, HTTP, right? So the next thing you put is the URL that you want to go to. What do we say, 9080, right? Except if I leave off, oh, that's not what I wanted. Of course not. If I leave off the scheme and just do this, it assumes HTTP. If I leave off this, it just assumes localhost. So this is the simplest command you can make to HTTPy, and it's beautiful, right? So I get a 404 not found. This is the other thing you get. Look at that. It's brilliant. It's formatted and color-coded, easy to look at, okay? So HTTP bin, HTTPy. Yay, you've learned something new. A new tool. So, but that wasn't the demo I wanted to show you, right? So headers. So you can see the headers that we got back. These are the headers that were received, and you can see we added a header, right? So there we go. So it works. It was a demo, like Josh said, so it's supposed to work. All right, so back to our code. Let's add another route, show a different way of doing things. Let's say by host. So here we can say myhost.org. Okay. Restart this. If I was using configuration, I could just refresh, send a refresh, and it would automatically do it. But since I'm creating code, I have to restart. All right, so now I have to send some data, right? So if I try and do a get, I'll get a 404 because nothing matches. But I need to send data, and via HTTPy, I can say, if I pass a name value pair separated by a colon, since that's actually the part of the HTTP spec, isn't it, for headers? Then you can just say this, and it assumes it's a header if it's separated by a colon. We said myhost.org, right? So now we can see the response there, and there's our, but that's not always, a filter like this isn't always super useful, right? Like a static thing. So we added some support for all these pattern matchings just straight from Spring Framework. I get to use all that beautiful goodness that, smart people wrote, not me. And you can do these matches just like you do in request mapping, right? You can add path parameters, so you can do the same thing. And then in the filters, you can reuse that little bit. And so you get a bit of a dynamic value here. All right, so one more time. And so now the interesting thing is that value is updated dynamically, right? So you can use some of that dynamicness without having to write a custom filter, right? You could absolutely do all of this with a custom filter, super easy. But we try and make that a little easier for you. But what if, so I want to see if I can do this. Let's do a quick, go back to path, echo, I don't need a filter. So open up another shell here. So if I go to, I'm going to show WebSockets, localhost 9000. I believe that's all I need. So there's this nice little tool called WSCAD that will run, oh, man, I can't show it. Why is that? No. Don't look at my password. Shoot, I can't show it. I don't know why that's not on my machine. Bummer. I guess I should have tried this demo before I showed it to you, huh? Anyway, you would have seen a neat demo of WebSockets working. I could send data from the client through the gateway and it would work, and then I'd send data from the server back through the client and it would work. It's a beautiful demo. I'll have to figure out where that command went on my machine. All right, moving on. All right, let's go back to some slides. See, aren't live demos fun? So one of the things that I'm super interested in is that our commercial team, Spring Cloud Services, like they create the Spring Cloud tile on PCF. They started work on a management console with links to docs and metrics and tracing. We'll provide some API discoverability for you. So we worked with one of our designers to come up with a mock-up of what this might look like. So what you're about to see doesn't exist anywhere except like Photoshop, okay? But it's something that they're actively working on building. So this shows, that's an old screenshot too. But basically you can see a human-readable description of your APIs. You can see what URL it's going to, what the filters are that are applied to it, links to documentation, links to metrics, links to tracing. So what we're starting to do is we have all this information in our distributed systems, but they're not really aggregated anywhere, and this will provide a place for developers to go to look, see what APIs are available for number one, and also to see, you know, what the health of that service looks like. What are the documentation for that service? What, you know, and you get this overall view of your system. And so I'm really excited about the work that's going on here from our commercial team. But future release, okay? So I kind of touched on this before, but since Gateway is just a boot app, right, you don't have to send a ticket to some other team that runs some external service. It's just a deploy or a configuration change if you're doing dynamic configuration, right? It's just a boot app. You can just deploy it. Follow your normal testing, CI/CD, if that's what you need to do to get it out. But this could be, you could get a change out to production fairly quickly with Gateway. It really doesn't matter what your clients are written in, right? I believe WSCAD is written in JavaScript, right? So it doesn't matter what's on the front end, what's on the back end, right? Gateway supports whatever your clients and services are written in. So security loves Gateway as well. So any Spring Security users out there, it's pretty powerful stuff. So Gateway plugs into Spring Security and allows for, you know, setting up security at the edge of your systems. On Pivotal Application Service, on the Pivotal platform, there's a single sign-on service built with Gateway that's available right now that provides single sign-on between your services kind of in an automated way. You get to set it up with your familiar tools and things like that. So cross-cutting security can happen here. Authentication, authorization, right? With tools like OAuth 2, we have a filter that will relay OAuth tokens to downstream services. Operators also love Gateway. So there was a talk earlier about deconstructing monoliths, right? So Gateway is a great way to do that. So how might that look? So say you have your, and I mean, let's face it, it's not a legacy system, right? It's the thing that's actually making you money, right? So someone coined the term heritage application, right? These are the apps that are actually making you money, not the new thing that you're doing. So you could do something like this, right? Where, you know, and you do, you know, for the above APIs, they get siphoned off to a different service, but you could say, and they're executed in order of definition, okay? So this could go to, excuse me. So I mentioned before that we have integration with service discovery, right? So you use a special URL called load balance, LB, and then you could say, this is my, you know, heritage app. So everything, after everything else, if I haven't matched anywhere, by default, go back, right? And so this is a great way you can start to slice off pieces of your heritage apps on your own schedule, right? You don't have to go big bang. You can do it little bits and pieces at a time. So I'm going to comment that out since we really don't have that place to go to. So we integrate with Micrometer. That's been mentioned before. So if you're not familiar with Micrometer, it was created for Spring Boot 2, but it's the SLF for J for metrics, right? It's an API that allows you to create metrics and gather them, and then export them to whatever system you have. There are a couple of dozen or more integrations with Micrometer. So likely your system is using one of those. So whatever you're using, we don't try and dictate, you know, what metric system you use, but we want to allow you to export those metrics. And so like I said, we have some custom metrics from Gateway so you can get a better view of your system. And by default, that comes in Boot 2. So you can make pretty graphs, right? We all like pretty graphs. We like to show our bosses pretty graphs, especially when they're show good numbers, right? Obviously. So we also integrate with distributed tracing systems. So Spring Cloud Sleuth is our tracing library in Spring Cloud. So this shows a sample of a trace, which is your overall, a single request through your system is a trace. And each part of your system that it goes through is called a span. So if you start traces at the edge, as far, you know, as close to the client as you can get an overall picture of what a request looks like as it goes through. And then when requests are slow, you can see which part of your system is slow specifically, right? So it's a great tool for diagnosing latency in your system. We can do request rate limiting. Let me see, my web service demo didn't go so well, so we'll go ahead and try one more time here and see if we can't show you rate limiting. So I'm just going to use, okay, and we'll go ahead and add Do you see that? Do you see how fast I wrote that? IntelliJ is awesome, right? It lets you set up things that you forget. So what I've done here, so the company called Stripe, has anyone heard of Stripe before? Payments API company, they posted about how they do rate limiting, and they use Redis as a backing store because if you have multiple places that requests come in, you need some place to store information about those requests. And uses an algorithm called the token bucket algorithm. If you're interested, go read the white paper. It's quite fun. But we need a key to be able to store that information. So I have one more bean I have to define here. Again, here's our key resolver. Boom, right? That was awesome. All right. So let's run this guy. Come back to our terminal. Whew. Oh, that's the wrong terminal. I was like, wait, where did all my commands go? So if we do limited.org, forbidden. Right, what's different? Man, my demos are not going well today. I don't have Spring Security. That would give me the 403. Okay, moving on. So again, rate limiting would give you a nice 429 if the user exceeded the number of requests they could make in any particular second. Okay, one more demo. Let's see if we can actually see a working demo, okay? So this is the actuator endpoints that are available. Localhost 9080. Oh, you know what? It's not going to work. I know why, though. Because I need to tell it to expose all of the endpoints. I remembered, right? That's good. /actuator / gateway routes. Perfect. So you get a nice textual representation of the routes that you can see. So these are some of the integrations that we provide with Actuator. Okay? So the last thing I'll talk about quickly, Josh mentioned this earlier, we're doing some integration with websocket, which is a network protocol. So the folks that came from Netflix, so what did Netflix do originally to overcome these problems? They wrote libraries, right? You have Hystrix, you have Ribbon, you have Zuul, you have these libraries because they could do it quickly, right? They could just release a new version of the library. There's another direction you could take, right, which is the platform. So this is where you get things like service mesh, right? So they try and handle it at the platform layer. Well, these folks that created the Netflix stuff went, well, maybe we need to do it at a different place, at the network protocol layer. So with websocket, you don't need, so it's reactive streams, but across the network. So you get back pressure across the network. So you don't need things like a circuit breaker. So with Gateway, we're implementing a websocket broker, which when you set it up and run, it allows, you also don't need a separate service discovery system because that, if all your services are written with websocket, that broker knows about all of them because they've all connected to it. And you route, and you can actually have secure services. Imagine like running on a cloud and you don't allow any incoming connections over any port, yet your system still functions, right? It's because it made a connection to the broker, and that it's a long-lived connection, so all the requests come down that single connection. So it's something that we'll release in the future, and I'm very excited about because when I think, I've been writing a library for the last 5.5 years, right? I haven't been deep in application code, and I think to myself, what would I use if I could, do it how I wanted? And websocket would be one of those things. So that's Spring Cloud Gateway. Sorry for the demo fails, but it's secure. Oh, you're right. Pair programming. So yes, so what did I do? So you're exactly right. This is, man. So you need something to, if it had no ID or no key, it's not going to let you through. Huh? No, that still wasn't it? Oh, colon. Yeah, you're right. Yep. No, confused. No. Why is that? Oh well, I'll look at it later. Anyway, so thank you for attending. Thank you for listening. Hope you've all learned something about what Pivotal does today. Hope you learned some things about Spring. I believe I'm going to stay up on stage for another minute. Is that? We have some prizes to give away. So hang on in your seats. Thanks again.